welcome to this conference on recession in Europe and implications for India and Southeast Asia. So with these presentations, I think we can start the debate in a minute, but being the EU visiting fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School and being an EU official in Singapore and not belonging neither to ISAS or to ESSEC, I thought I should say a few words about the relationship between EU and India in order to put tonight's conference in a perspective. India and the European Union became strategic partners back in 2004. And as you may know, the European Union has a limited number of strategic partners, 10 in all. 4 of them are in Asia: China, Japan, India, and South Korea. When you are strategic partners, you meet at various levels, including at the summit level. And there have been EU-India summits for almost every year since this partnership was agreed. The last summit took place in February 2012 in New Delhi. And as you may know, with the Lisbon Treaty, which entered into force at the end of 2009, there is more continuity in the EU's representation vis-à-vis third states, which means that it is now the President of the European Council, Mr. Van Rompuy, and the President of the European Commission, Mr. Barroso, who attend all the summits and meet third parties. That means it's no longer the rotating presidency which was changing every 6 months. Personally, I think this is an advantage. I hope third states think the same. There's a joke about an American president who, at a summit with the European Union, said, "Who's the guy in the middle?" He had never seen him before. So we had this system of changing every 6 months. And I think if you want to be strategic, you need personal contacts and you need continuity. And this is what we have more of with the Lisbon Treaty, when it's the same top politicians who are meeting with their Indian counterpart or Chinese counterpart or other counterpart. In that context, let me just highlight that this week in Brussels, in fact today, we have a meeting of foreign ministers and a meeting of European affairs ministers, but Thursday, Friday, there will be a European Council, one more, chaired by Mr. Van Rompuy, and of course they will discuss a number of economic issues due to the situation in Europe, the euro crisis or the sovereign debt crisis, but they also have on the agenda strategic partnerships. So this is interesting that the same people, Prime Minister Cameron, President Hollande, Chancellor Merkel, they discuss internal EU economic development, and of course there's something to do there, but at the same time they discuss strategic partnerships. And the person who is chairing these meetings, and one of the key partners in the meetings, President Barroso, are then the 2 representatives of the EU traveling to India, to China, to Russia, to Japan, and so on. And I think this is something one should take into account. Maybe you don't really see the results of it, but what I hear from some of the strategic partners of the European Union, they appreciate this, to see the same people and to talk to the people who are really, you can say, involved in the crisis management that we are dealing with inside the European Union. The next summit between the EU and India is coming up soon. The date is not yet there, but it should be within the next few months. That brings me, of course, to the relationship between EU and India in the area of trade. As you may know, India is EU's 8th trading partner, according to my latest information, and the EU is India's largest trading partner, almost 100 billion euros. I'm not sure about the Singapore dollar, sorry, I haven't been here long enough. And the EU is the biggest investor in India. So of course there's a lot of interest in a forthcoming free trade agreement between the EU and India. There will be a lot of potential there. This has been negotiated since 2007. There have been some important contacts in Brussels a few weeks ago at the level of ministers to prepare the summit. And the strategic objective from both the European Union and India is to get a free trade agreement between those 2 parties as soon as possible. And let me just mention that in the area of free trade agreements, things are moving quite fast around India and around the EU. The EU has, as you may know, now a free trade agreement with Korea, which entered into force in 2011. In December, the EU agreed a free trade agreement with Singapore, which is now being ratified. Just last week, the Prime Minister of Thailand was in Brussels. They agreed that there would be an FTA with Thailand. They are being negotiated with a number of other ASEAN countries. And one big FTA which is in the pipeline is between the EU and Japan, which will be formally confirmed when we will have an EU summit with Japan in the near future. These are EU bilateral, but of course there are also a number of multilateral trade agreements being discussed, and I'm sure some of the panelists will discuss this, the TPP, the RCEP, and most recently, as you may know, the EU and the US have announced that they will also work on a transatlantic free trade agreement. My final point, because the title of today's lecture is that the EU is in crisis, let me just remind you that the EU is in crisis, but we are dealing with it. And as I speak, ministers are meeting in Brussels. Let me also remind you that the EU is still the world's largest economy. It is the largest trading bloc in the world, and it is the largest internal market in the world. And that's also why a number of third parties are quite interested in having trade agreements and trade with the EU. The European Union has among the highest GDP in the world and remains committed to free trade, despite the problems that we may have with the sovereign debt crisis. I think this is very important. In fact, at the European Council in February, last time Mr. Van Rompuy chaired the Council, the whole area of trade was on the agenda. And of course, as we try to solve the crisis with structural reforms, cutting the budgets. Some countries, of course, it's very tough, austerity, you see high unemployment, but at the same time, the European Union is working on getting more growth to Europe, and of course, in that context, trade and free trade comes in. So the European Union is still very much in favor of free trade. Let me also mention, because we are in Asia, and sometimes we forget that the European Union is the largest donor of development assistance in the world, including in Asia. There are still a lot of poor people in Asia. Sometimes if we're in Singapore, maybe we forget it, but when we travel outside Singapore, we are reminded of that. So there's still a lot of development assistance being given to Asia. And the European Union is a leader in sustainable development, environmental awareness, and tackling climate change.